The blood test results were crumpled in my shaking hands as I lay dying in this hospital bed, AIDS finally claiming what was left of my deteriorating body. My son David sat beside me, still believing his HIV diagnosis 3 years ago was just bad luck, and I couldn't take the secret to my grave anymore. "David, I need to tell you something that will destroy you. I gave you HIV. I gave it to your wife Sarah. I gave it to your newborn daughter Emma. I knew I was positive for 15 years, and I infected my entire family because I was too selfish and scared to tell the truth." The heart monitor exploded into chaos as my son's face went white with horror. But let me tell you how this nightmare began, because what I did to my family was so unforgivably evil that I've been dying with guilt for years, watching them suffer from a disease I gave them. Before I continue my story, I really want to know where you're watching me from. Tell me in the comments what city you're from, and if you can, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. My name is Margaret Williams, and I'm 61 years old, dying at Los Angeles General Hospital. 3 days ago, my family still believed their HIV infections were tragic coincidences. My son David diagnosed 3 years ago, his wife Sarah 2 years ago, and most heartbreakingly, their baby daughter Emma, born HIV-positive 18 months ago. But today, with my final breaths, I'm confessing the most monstrous thing any mother could do. I knowingly infected my entire family with HIV because I was too cowardly to face the consequences of my own reckless behavior. It started 16 years ago when I was 45, recently divorced and feeling invisible as a middle-aged woman. My husband Robert had left me for his 28-year-old secretary, taking half our assets and leaving me bitter, lonely, and desperate to feel desirable again. I started going to bars, clubs, anywhere I could meet men who might make me feel young and wanted again. That's where I met Carlos, a charming 38-year-old bartender with dark eyes and a dangerous smile. He was everything my ex-husband wasn't: spontaneous, passionate, exciting. We had a whirlwind affair that lasted 6 months, filled with passionate nights and reckless abandon. I felt alive again for the first time in years. What I didn't know was that Carlos was HIV positive, and he wasn't telling his sexual partners. 3 months after our affair ended, I started feeling sick. Flu-like symptoms, fatigue, swollen lymph nodes. I went to my doctor thinking it was just stress from the divorce, but Dr. Peterson suggested some routine blood work just to be safe. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in October 2008. "Mrs. Williams, I need you to come in immediately to discuss your test results." I knew before he said the words. The way his voice sounded, the urgency, the careful professional tone that doctors use when they're about to destroy your life. "You've tested positive for HIV," Dr. Peterson said gently. "I know this is devastating news, but with modern treatments, this is no longer a death sentence. We need to start you on antiretroviral therapy immediately, and we need to contact anyone you may have exposed." That's when I should have been honest. That's when I should have told my family, started treatment, protected the people I loved most. Instead, I made the most selfish decision of my life. I decided to keep it secret. My reasoning was twisted but felt logical at the time. I had only been with Carlos since my divorce, and he was out of my life. My son David was married and living across the country. I wasn't dating anyone seriously. I convinced myself that if I just took the medication and kept quiet, no one would ever have to know about my shameful secret. But HIV doesn't respect family boundaries or selfish plans. What I didn't realize was that my secret would soon become impossible to hide, and the lies I told myself would lead to the most horrific chain of events imaginable. For the first year after my diagnosis, I managed to keep my secret relatively easily. I took my antiretroviral medications in private, told people my frequent doctor visits were for routine checkups, and avoided any situations that might put others at risk. I convinced myself I was being responsible by staying isolated and careful, but HIV doesn't respect careful plans or good intentions. The first crack in my facade came during a family barbecue in summer 2009. My nephew Jake, who was 8 years old at the time, fell off his bike and scraped his knee badly. In the chaos of a crying child and panicked adults, I instinctively grabbed paper towels and pressed them against his bleeding wound, forgetting entirely about my own diagnosis in the moment of family emergency. It wasn't until later that night, as I lay in bed, replaying the day, that I realized what I'd done. My hands had small cuts from rose thorns earlier that week. There had been direct blood contact. I spent the entire night in a cold sweat, terrified that I might have infected my nephew. For weeks, I watched Jake obsessively for any signs of illness, any symptoms that might indicate transmission. When he remained healthy, I told myself it had been fine, that the risk was minimal, that I was overreacting. I used his continued health as proof that I could manage my condition without telling anyone. I was setting myself up for an even more devastating mistake. The first person I infected was my son David, and the way it happened still makes me physically sick to remember. 2 years after my diagnosis, David and his wife Sarah came to visit me for Thanksgiving. David had cut his hand badly while carving the turkey, and I rushed to help him stop the bleeding. But this time, it wasn't instinct or panic that guided my actions. It was a calculated decision born from 2 years of living with my secret. I had convinced myself that the risk was minimal, that modern HIV wasn't as easily transmitted as people thought, that my viral load was undetectable, so transmission was nearly impossible. These were lies I told myself to justify taking a risk with my son's health rather than face the shame of disclosure. In my panic, I didn't think about protection. I just grabbed the bloody dish towel and pressed it against his wound with my bare hands, my own hands covered in small cuts from gardening earlier that day. "Mom, you're bleeding too," David said, noticing the cuts on my fingers mixing with his blood. "It's nothing, sweetheart," I said, continuing to apply pressure to his wound. "Just some scratches from the roses." I knew, even in that moment, that I was potentially exposing him. I knew that blood-to-blood contact was a transmission risk, but I told myself the chances were small, that it probably wouldn't happen, that I was just being a caring mother helping her injured son. I was lying to myself, and I knew it. The months following that Thanksgiving were torture. I found myself researching HIV transmission rates obsessively, looking for statistics that would ease my guilt. I learned that the risk of transmission through blood contact was actually higher than I'd convinced myself, especially when both parties had open wounds. The medical websites I visited late at night became my secret shame, filled with information I should have known before I made that terrible decision. I started calling David more frequently, asking seemingly casual questions about his health. "How are you feeling, honey? Any flu symptoms? You seem tired. Are you getting enough sleep?" Each conversation was actually a medical assessment disguised as maternal concern. David, being the loving son he was, appreciated what he thought was increased attention from his mother. He had no idea I was monitoring him for signs of a disease I might have given him. For 6 months, I lived in a state of constant anxiety. Every phone call could be the one where David told me he felt sick. Every visit could reveal symptoms I'd caused. The guilt was eating me alive, but I still couldn't bring myself to confess what had happened. 6 months later, David called me with news that made my heart stop. "Mom, I need to tell you something. Sarah and I have been trying to get pregnant, so we both got complete physical exams. They found something unexpected. I tested positive for HIV. I should have confessed right then. I should have told him the truth, explained how it happened, taken responsibility for my horrible mistake. Instead, I played the shocked, supportive mother. "Oh my God, David, that's impossible. How could this happen?" "I don't know, Mom. I've never used drugs, never had unprotected sex with anyone but Sarah. The doctors are baffled. They think I might have gotten it from a blood transfusion after my motorcycle accident 5 years ago, but those blood tests came back clean." I let my son agonize over how he could have contracted HIV, watching him blame himself and rack his brain for explanations, when I knew exactly how it had happened. I had given it to him with my own hands. but the nightmare was just beginning. 8 months later, Sarah tested positive too. The doctors assumed she had contracted it from David, which was logical since they were married and sexually active. I watched my daughter-in-law cry as she processed her diagnosis, watched my son blame himself for infecting the woman he loved, and I said nothing. "At least we know not to have children now," Sarah said through her tears during one of our phone calls. "We can't risk passing this to a baby." "You're both young and healthy," I told her, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. "With modern medicine, you can live normal lives." I was giving them hope while hiding the fact that I was the source of their nightmare. If this story is shocking you, hit that subscribe button because what happened next was even more devastating. Against all medical advice, David and Sarah decided to try for a baby 2 years later. They worked with specialists, took every precaution, used cutting-edge prevention methods to minimize transmission risk. The pregnancy was carefully monitored, and they were cautiously optimistic. Emma was born on March 15, 2023, and for 48 hours, we all held our breath waiting for her test results. The call came while I was visiting David and Sarah in the hospital, holding my beautiful granddaughter in my arms. Dr. Martinez's voice was gentle but devastating. "I'm sorry. Emma has tested positive for HIV." I watched my son collapse into a chair, his face in his hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I watched Sarah stare at the ceiling, tears streaming silently down her face, her body shaking with the magnitude of this devastating news. And I held my HIV-positive granddaughter, this perfect, innocent baby, knowing that I was the reason this child would spend her life fighting a disease I had brought into our family. The scene in that hospital room will haunt me forever. David's anguished cries of, "This is all my fault," echoing off the walls. Sarah's quiet devastation as she processed that her newborn daughter would face a lifetime of medical challenges. The tiny baby in my arms, completely unaware that her grandmother was the source of her lifelong struggle. "This is my fault," David whispered through his tears. "I gave this to my wife, and now to my daughter. I've destroyed my family." "No, baby," Sarah said, reaching for his hand despite her own devastation. "This isn't anyone's fault. We knew the risks when we decided to try for a baby." Hearing my son blame himself for something I had done to him was torture beyond description. But watching my daughter-in-law comfort the man I had infected, seeing her strength in the face of losing the healthy future she'd planned for her child, made me realize the true scope of the destruction I had caused. I should have confessed then. Watching my son blame himself for infecting his wife and child when I was the actual source was torture. But I was a coward. I was more afraid of losing my family than I was committed to giving them the truth they deserved. For the next 18 months, I watched my family struggle with their diagnoses in ways that broke my heart daily. David fell into a deep depression, convinced he was cursed and dangerous to everyone he loved. He started seeing a therapist, but his sessions only reinforced his misguided guilt as he searched for ways he might have contracted HIV and blamed himself for every possibility. Sarah threw herself into research with the fierce determination of a mother protecting her child. She became an expert on pediatric HIV, connecting with support groups, researching experimental treatments, and building a network of other families dealing with similar challenges. She was incredible, strong, informed, and completely devoted to giving Emma the best possible future. But watching Sarah's strength only made my guilt worse. This amazing woman was fighting a battle caused by my cowardice. She was researching treatments for a disease I had introduced to their family. She was connecting with other parents, dealing with challenges that existed because of my selfish choices. Baby Emma, thankfully, responded well to treatment, but she required constant medical monitoring and would need medication for the rest of her life. Watching my granddaughter take her daily medications, seeing her tiny body poked with needles for regular blood tests, knowing that this beautiful child's entire life was shaped by my actions, it was a special kind of hell. The family dinners were the worst. Sitting around the table, listening to David talk about his guilt, Sarah share updates on Emma's treatment, everyone supporting each other through what they believed was a random medical tragedy, all while I sat there knowing I was the cause of their suffering. I would hold Emma during these dinners, this perfect little girl who smiled and laughed despite everything, and feel like I was holding evidence of my own monstrosity. All while I sat at family dinners, holding my granddaughter, listening to my son's guilt and my daughter-in-law's brave optimism, knowing I was the monster who had caused all their suffering. The truth started eating me alive in ways I never expected. I began having panic attacks during the most innocent family moments. When Emma would reach for me with her tiny hands, I'd flash back to that Thanksgiving when I'd contaminated David with those same hands. When David would hug me goodbye after visits, I'd remember how those arms had once been healthy because of my lies. I started having insomnia, lying awake every night, replaying the moment I chose to help David without protection, reimagining scenarios where I'd been brave enough to tell the truth before anyone got hurt. I began having what I now know were psychosomatic symptoms of extreme guilt. Chest pains that weren't heart problems, stomach issues that weren't related to digestive disease, headaches that no medication could touch. My own HIV was well controlled with medication, but the stress of keeping this secret was destroying my mental health in ways that my doctors couldn't understand. I lost 30 pounds in 6 months, developed chronic insomnia, and started showing signs of what my physician thought might be early-onset dementia due to my confusion and memory lapses during appointments. But it wasn't dementia. It was the cognitive load of maintaining a lie so enormous that it was affecting my ability to function normally. The breaking point came during Emma's first birthday party. David had organized a beautiful celebration, inviting family and friends to celebrate this milestone. For a baby born HIV-positive, reaching her first birthday, healthy and thriving, was genuinely something to celebrate. I watched David give a speech about how grateful he was for Emma's health, how proud he was of Sarah's strength, and how determined he was to be the best father possible despite the challenges their family faced. He talked about taking responsibility for the situation, about learning to forgive himself for what he saw as his role in their diagnoses. "I may never know how I got infected," David said, holding Emma as she clapped her little hands. "But I know that dwelling on the past won't help our future. Sarah and Emma are my everything, and I'm going to spend every day making sure they know how much I love them." The applause around me sounded like thunder. Everyone was wiping away tears, moved by my son's courage and love. And I sat there, clapping along, while dying inside, knowing that his beautiful speech about accepting responsibility was based on a complete lie. That night, after the party, I went home and wrote a confession letter. I wrote 17 pages detailing everything: the affair with Carlos, my diagnosis, the moment of transmission with David, the years of watching them suffer while I stayed silent. I sealed it in an envelope and addressed it to David. Then I sat with it for 3 days, unable to send it. On the 4th day, I burned it. 6 months ago, I started showing symptoms that weren't related to HIV progression. I was losing weight rapidly, having severe abdominal pain, and feeling weaker every day. After extensive testing, Dr. Peterson delivered another devastating diagnosis: pancreatic cancer, stage 4, possibly triggered by years of chronic stress and immune system compromise. "With aggressive treatment, we might be able to give you 6 to 8 months, he said gently. Without treatment, maybe 3 to 4 months. The cancer is quite advanced, and given your HIV status, aggressive treatment might be more harmful than helpful." I chose minimal treatment. Part of me felt like the cancer was justice for what I had done to my family. But mostly, I knew I needed to use whatever time I had left to finally tell the truth. The cancer diagnosis gave me a deadline I could no longer ignore. But even facing death, confessing felt impossible. How do you tell your family that you've been lying to them for years about something so fundamental? How do you reveal that you're the source of their greatest trauma? How do you destroy their understanding of their own lives in service of clearing your conscience? I spent weeks trying to find the right approach. I considered writing letters, having family meetings, telling them one by one. I practiced conversations in front of my bathroom mirror, trying to find words that would minimize the devastating impact. But there was no way to soften this revelation. The hardest part was watching my family rally around me during my cancer diagnosis. David took leave from his engineering job to help care for me. Sarah brought Emma to visit constantly, letting me rock my granddaughter while she played with toys on my living room floor. They were so loving, so supportive, treating me like the perfect mother and grandmother they believed me to be. When I told them I was getting sicker and wanted to spend my final days telling them important family stories, they gathered around my hospital bed eagerly, expecting heartwarming memories and wisdom from their dying matriarch. Instead, I destroyed their world all over again. I need to tell you something about your HIV diagnoses, I began yesterday morning, my voice shaking. They weren't coincidences, they weren't bad luck, they weren't from David's old blood transfusion or unknown exposure. David and Sarah looked confused. What do you mean, Mom? I mean, I gave it to you, all of you. I've been HIV positive for 15 years, and I infected my son, my daughter-in-law, and my granddaughter because I was too selfish and scared to tell the truth. The silence in the room was deafening. I watched understanding dawn on their faces, saw the exact moment they realized what I was saying. That's impossible, David said weakly. How could you? The Thanksgiving, when you cut your hand, I helped stop the bleeding. My hands had cuts on them from gardening. I knew it was a risk, but I did it anyway. Sarah's face went completely white. You knew? You've known this whole time? Yes. I've known every day for 3 years that I was the reason David got sick. I've known for 2 years that you got it from him because I gave it to him first. And I've known for 18 months that Emma was born positive because of a chain of infection that started with me. The room erupted into chaos. David started screaming, his voice raw with 3 years of misdirected guilt and self-blame. Sarah was crying so hard she could barely breathe. Emma, sensing the tension, began crying too. You watched me blame myself, David shouted. You watched me think I was cursed, that I was dangerous. You watched me hate myself for infecting my wife and daughter when it was you the entire time. I know, I whispered. I know how horrible this is. I know you'll never forgive me. Forgive you? Sarah's voice was ice cold. You gave my baby a chronic illness that will affect her entire life. You watched us struggle with medication, doctor visits, the fear and stigma, all while knowing you were the cause. She stood up abruptly, picking up Emma. We're leaving. I can't look at you right now. Sarah, please, I started, but she cut me off. Number, you don't get to ask for anything. You watched your son suffer for 3 years, thinking he had destroyed his family when you were the one who destroyed ours. They left, and I thought they might never come back. For 24 hours, I lay in this hospital bed thinking I would die alone, having confessed my sins but lost my family in the process. But this morning, David came back, alone, his eyes red from crying. But he came back. I need to understand, he said quietly. I need you to explain to me how you could do this, how you could watch us suffer and say nothing. So I told him everything. The divorce, the loneliness, the affair with Carlos, the diagnosis I was too ashamed to share, the moment of panic when I helped with his cut, the years of telling myself it probably hadn't transmitted, the growing horror as my family got sicker while I stayed silent. I was a coward, I confessed. I was more afraid of losing you than I was committed to protecting you. Every day for 3 years, I chose my own comfort over your well-being. David listened to everything, his face cycling through anger, disgust, grief, and something that might have been understanding. Mom, he said finally, what you did was unforgivable. You not only infected us, but you stole 3 years of our lives that we spent in unnecessary guilt and confusion. You watched me hate myself, watched me question every decision I'd ever made, watched me feel like I was cursed. I know, I whispered. But, he continued, and I looked up in surprise, I also understand that you were scared and ashamed, and that the longer you waited to tell the truth, the harder it became. I don't forgive you. I may never forgive you, but I understand how you got trapped in this lie. He reached into his bag and pulled out a framed photo of Emma laughing in her high chair. This is for you, because despite everything you did, she's still your granddaughter, and you should see her smile while you still can. Is Sarah? I couldn't finish the question. Sarah is furious, and she has every right to be. She may never speak to you again, but I'll make sure Emma knows who you were before this, even if she'll also know what you did. Those words meant everything to me. Not forgiveness, I didn't deserve that, but acknowledgement that I was more than just the monster who had infected them. David, I said, gripping his hand with what little strength I had left. There's one more thing. I want to set up a fund for Emma's medical expenses. I have some money saved and my life insurance. It's not enough to undo what I did, but it's something. He nodded. That would be good. She'll need ongoing care for the rest of her life. And I want you to know that none of this was about not loving you. I loved you so much that I was terrified of losing you. That doesn't excuse what I did, but I need you to know that my silence came from love, even though it caused the opposite of what love should do. David was quiet for a long time. Mom, love isn't supposed to be selfish. Love is supposed to protect people, even when protecting them hurts you. You chose yourself over us, over and over again, for 3 years. I know. I failed as a mother in the most fundamental way possible. Yes, you did. But you were also the mother who taught me to ride a bike, who stayed up all night when I had pneumonia, who helped me through my divorce before I met Sarah. People aren't just one thing, even when they do something unforgivable. As David left that evening, he paused in the doorway. Mom, I want you to know that we're going to be okay. All of us. Emma is responding well to treatment. Sarah and I are both healthy, and we're stronger as a family because of what we've been through together. Your betrayal was devastating, but it didn't break us. I'm so proud of you, I whispered. You became a better man than I was a mother. I learned that from you too, actually. You taught me to take responsibility for my mistakes, even if you couldn't follow your own lesson. Margaret Williams died at 4:15 a.m. on a Saturday morning, 3 days after confessing the truth that had poisoned her family for years. David was holding her hand, having chosen to be present for her death despite the unforgivable thing she had done. At her funeral, David read a letter she had written for the service. I spent the last 3 years of my life watching my family suffer from a disease I gave them, and I compounded that suffering by letting them blame themselves and bad luck instead of me. There is no excuse for what I did. Fear and shame are explanations, not justifications. But I want my granddaughter Emma to know, when she's old enough to understand this story, that her grandmother loved her enough to finally tell the truth, even though it cost me my family's love. I want her to know that people can do terrible things and still be worthy of some form of forgiveness, and that the worst mistakes can sometimes teach the most important lessons. Emma, my darling girl, you will live with HIV because of my choices, but you will also live with the knowledge that truth is always better than lies, that love requires courage, and that even grandmothers can fail in ways that teach their grandchildren how to do better. 6 months after Margaret's death, David called her old phone number one last time and left a voicemail. Mom, I wanted you to know that Emma is doing great. Her viral load is undetectable, she's hitting all her developmental milestones, and she's the happiest baby you could imagine. Sarah and I are doing well too. We're in counseling, working through the trauma of your betrayal, but we're healing. I also wanted you to know that we've started volunteering with HIV awareness organizations, sharing our story to help people understand the importance of disclosure and early testing. Your terrible secret has become something that might help other families avoid what we went through. I still don't forgive you, Mom. I may never fully forgive you, but I understand now that forgiveness isn't about forgetting or excusing what someone did. It's about choosing not to let their actions poison the rest of your life. Emma will know about you, Mom. She'll know that her grandmother gave her HIV because of fear and selfishness, but she'll also know that her grandmother loved her enough to tell the truth before she died, even though it meant dying alone and unforgiven. I hope you're at peace now. I hope you understand that love sometimes means accepting consequences, even when they're devastating. And I hope other parents who hear this story will choose courage over comfort when their children's lives are at stake. Share this story if it moved you, because sometimes the people we love most can betray us in the deepest ways, but families can heal even from the unforgivable when truth finally wins over secrecy. Truth and healing win always.